evening, fellow Toastmasters and honored guests.
Good evening.
Tonight, I'm going to start with some questions. Why? Because I love questions. And in the last several years, I've learned some important things about the right and wrong way to ask questions. Before the meeting began, I gave some questions to a few of our members, and I'm going to ask them to please stand now. So if you have questions, stand up. And each of them has the same question, and they're going to read it in two different ways. And I just want you to listen to the differences in their presentation. So, go ahead.
What makes you say that? What makes you say that?
Why did you say that? Why did you say that?
What is the problem you are trying to solve? What is the problem you are trying to solve? And believe it or not, these are all questions that I've asked when I've been working on a project with other people. Maybe I did it in the same way, or maybe I didn't. That's just going to have to remain for another time. But I will say through experience, I learned that how I ask the question is equally important to the content of the question. There's nothing outre about effective communication. Truly, being an effective communicator is part of being an effective leader. The tone, volume, and pace of our voice conveys something, and not using these tools correctly can send the wrong message. We must learn to modulate these aspects of our speech to make sure they accurately match what we want to communicate. Through observation and experience in this very room, we see that this is true when we give speeches. But I believe that it's actually more important to pay attention to these things in interpersonal communication and leadership, because people are more easily picking up on the nuances when you're talking to them one-on-one. How many of you have ever seen the communication cycle visualized? How many of you have ever seen this? Okay. I learned about this communication cycle in my communications degree at the University of Miami. I don't have a reference for this, it's just knowledge that is in my head. It's very common knowledge for those of you who study communication. And this is the gist of it. You have a sender who has a message to a receiver, and the receiver gives you feedback. Throughout the course of all of that, there's noise, just things that interfere. And why this is important to understand is this arrow between sender and message represents the encoding process. So this represents how you use tone, pace, and volume to send your message. They actually become part of your message, and then your receiver is going to get it. And they're going to interpret your message through the noise. Noise could represent their perspective on an issue, their emotions about the topic, or their emotions that have nothing to do with what you're talking about. Particularly if you're in a work environment and you're addressing an issue with an employee or a teammate, they may have something emotional happening at home that does affect their work. So that is also noise that can impact your communication process. And so remember, the important thing to remember though is that tone, pace, and volume all are part of your message when it comes down to it. And as a leader, you're responsible for the message that gets sent. You have to cut through that noise to make sure that you're clearly understood. And not understanding how to do that hampers the growth of your team. For example, I lead a team called the Sabin family. With my husband, we lead it together. And recently, I needed to get my oldest daughter's attention, so I hollered down the hall for her. She heard me because my volume and my pace were appropriate for the situation. However, my tone did not reflect my intent. She came out of her room thinking I was angry at her. And when in truth, I just can't yell without sounding mad. But because my daughter is generally agreeable and she's been taught to advocate for herself, she came out as requested, but told me how she decoded my message. She heard an angry mom, not a loud mom. And that was an important lesson for me to learn about how to effectively communicate with my team, the Sabin family. Now let's imagine that same scenario where my volume wasn't appropriate. I call her Charlotte, and I wait. Charlotte, and I wait. I call her a third time, and I still don't get a response. I can guarantee you that as I'm marching down the hall to her room, I'm getting angry, and I'm already contemplating how I'm going to attack her choice to ignore me. I get towards the end of the hall, and I hear her jamming out to her favorite worship song. I'm like, oh, that's why she didn't hear me, because she's got music on. The problem wasn't in her interpretation, it was how I encoded the message. I didn't cut through the noise that she was experiencing. That's a very literal example of noise, but you can imagine, just apply that to any other situation, and it's going to make a difference if you can cut through that noise. In the workplace, let's say you're sitting at your cubicle. There's an important meeting going on, your boss walks past you or your teammate walks past you and they give you a message about an important client. However, they're going so fast and you're not prepared to receive the message, you only get the second half. And because of the Doppler effect, where it goes, woo, the sound gets softer as they go away, you don't even get the second half of the message. And your boss, your teammates expecting you to accomplish something, but they did not cut through the noise, and your team communication is going to break down. The supervisor basically failed to account for the pace and volume of her spoken words, and the message was lost. Chaos ensues. Tone, volume, and pace are 3 very important tools to consider when you're deciding if you're being an effective communicator and leader. An effective leader will listen to these examples and understand that the aspects of our spoken word can carry as strong a message as the words themselves, and sometimes even stronger. Thank you.